One day she said, well, they were jealous. And I had never really even stopped to think of it that way.
John Fogerty, the voice of a generation, the man whose music became the soundtrack for one of America's most turbulent eras. His guitar riffs cut through the noise of protest and war, and his lyrics gave a voice to the forgotten and the frustrated. For 50 years, we thought we knew his story. We thought the anger in his voice was for politicians, the war, or the state of the world. But what if the deepest, most bitter battles he ever fought weren't on a world stage? What if the angriest songs he ever wrote weren't about politics, but about the people he despised in his own industry, his own band, and even his own family? For decades, he let his music do the talking, rapping his private wars in public anthems. But what happens when a legend, after a lifetime of bitterness, finally breaks his silence? Now, after years of legal battles, betrayals, and public feuds, the full story is being pieced together. We're about to explore the key figures and forces that became the focus of John Fogerty's famous fury. This isn't just a story about rivalries. It's a story of betrayal so deep it nearly silenced one of rock and roll's greatest voices for good. The truth is more shocking, personal, and dramatic than any song he ever wrote. Before we get to the names that haunted John Fogerty's career, you have to understand the man himself. John Fogerty wasn't just the singer of Creedence Clearwater Revival. For all intents and purposes, he was Creedence Clearwater Revival. He was the lead songwriter, the lead guitarist, the lead vocalist, and the producer. Between 1968 and 1972, he was a creative force of nature, cranking out an incredible 7 studio albums that gave us 9 top 10 singles. In 1969 alone, CCR was one of the biggest bands in the world, with some arguing their chart success that year even rivaled the Beatles. This was almost entirely due to Fogerty's singular, obsessive vision. But that kind of genius often comes with a price. Fogerty's iron-fisted control over the band's music was both its greatest strength and the seed of its own destruction. He saw himself as a perfectionist, guarding the sound he had so carefully crafted. His bandmates, however, started to see him as a dictator. That internal friction, combined with a disastrous record deal they signed when they were young and naive, created a perfect storm of resentment, jealousy, and betrayal that would explode in the most public and painful way. The battles that followed would cost him his band, his friendships, his fortune, and for a long time, even his own songs. This is the story of those battles, told through the people who became the focus of his legendary anger. Kicking off our list is a name that might be a real head. This isn't a story of backstage fights or public insults. It's more of a quiet, philosophical feud fought in the court of public opinion, and it seems, in the private corners of John Fogerty's mind. The 6th spot goes to a man often seen as Fogerty's peer, Bruce Springsteen. On the surface, these two icons of American rock should have been allies. Both wrote about the working class experience, the broken promises of the American dream, and the lives of everyday people. Springsteen himself has always been a huge admirer of Fogerty, even calling him the Hank Williams of my generation. When he inducted him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they've even performed together on several occasions, sharing the stage in moments that seem to celebrate their shared legacy. So where's the conflict? For Fogerty, it seems to have been a matter of authenticity. While the world was crowning Springsteen, the boss and the definitive voice of blue-collar America, Fogerty watched with a growing sense of injustice. In his eyes, he was the one who had actually lived it. He grew up in genuine hardship in El Chorrito, California. When Fogerty wrote Fortunate Son, it wasn't a clever story. It was a raw scream against a class system he knew firsthand. Having received a draft notice for the Vietnam War himself, the tension, from Fogerty's perspective, began to simmer in the mid-70s as critics praised Springsteen's sprawling, romantic epics as the authentic voice of American struggle, while sometimes framing Fogerty's work as simple swamp rock nostalgia. This narrative reportedly infuriated Fogerty. He saw Springsteen's stories of factory workers and street poets as a form of artistic fiction, feeling that Springsteen was being celebrated for writing novels while he was being overlooked for telling the truth. It was a silent resentment that festered for years. Fogerty felt he had been there first. He'd written the anthems, fought the battles, and lived the life. Yet, in the grand story of American rock, he felt like he was being written out, replaced by a man he saw as playing a part he had truly lived. The next name on our list brings the conflict much closer to home. This is where the myth of CCR as a band of brothers starts to crack, revealing the bitter fractures that tore them apart. Number 5 is the man who laid down the iconic, driving beat behind CCR's greatest hits, drummer Doug Cosmo Clifford. In the beginning, they were a unit. Clifford and bassist Stu Cook had been with John since their junior high school days in the late 1950s. They were friends who had chased a dream from garages to global stardom. Clifford's drumming was the engine of the CCR sound, powerful, relentless, and perfectly in sync with Fogerty's vision. For years, he was a loyal soldier in Fogerty's creative army. But as the band's success exploded, that loyalty started to sour into resentment. The problem, as with most of CCR's internal drama, came down to control. While Fogerty saw himself as the sole architect of their sound, Clifford and Cook began to feel more like session musicians than partners. They wanted more creative input, a bigger say in the band they had helped build. In later interviews, Fogerty recalled hearing them grumble, but claimed he didn't understand their jealousy at the time. The breaking point came after John's brother, Tom, quit the band in 1971. Fogerty, in a move he later admitted was a terrible idea, forced democracy on the remaining trio for their next album, Mardi Gras. He told Clifford and Cook they would each have to write and sing their own songs. On the surface, it looked like he was giving them the freedom they wanted, but many, including Cook and Clifford, saw it as an act of sabotage. It was as if Fogerty, the perfectionist, was stepping back and daring them to fail. The result was a disaster. The album was torn apart by critics and fans, a disjointed record that stained the band's legacy. It was the final nail in the coffin. But the animosity was far from over. Years later, when Clifford and Cook formed Creedence Clearwater Revisited, a tribute band playing the old hits, Fogerty saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He sued them to stop them from using the Creedence name, furious that they were, in his eyes, cashing in on his work. Though the courts ultimately sided with Cook and Clifford, the legal battle destroyed any hope of reconciliation. At the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 1993, Fogerty flatly refused to perform with them, instead taking the stage with Bruce Springsteen. To Fogerty, Clifford was a key player in a mutiny that destroyed his band and sided with his enemies. If Doug Clifford's betrayal was a mutiny, the actions of bassist Stu Cook were, in John Fogerty's eyes, even worse. Coming in at number 4, Stu Cook wasn't just the other half of CCR's rhythm section. He became a central figure in the legal and financial nightmare that would define Fogerty's life. Like Clifford, Cook's history with Fogerty went back to their teenage years. He provided the steady, melodic foundation for Fogerty's anthems. But he was also supposed to be the one with some business savvy. According to Fogerty, when the band got their original contract from Fantasy Records, the job of reviewing it fell to Cook, whose father was a lawyer. Fogerty has questioned whether Cook ever actually showed his father the document, because the deal they signed was a trap that gave away the publishing rights to all of Fogerty's songs. That one moment became the original sign in Fogerty's eyes. As the years went on, Cook and Clifford became a unified front, demanding more creative input and a more democratic business structure. Fogerty saw this as a direct challenge to his authority, and a misunderstanding of what made the band great. The ultimate betrayal, however, came during the fallout with Fantasy Records. As Fogerty prepared for a legal war against the label and its owner, Saul Zaentz, he learned the unthinkable. His bandmates had gone behind his back. In a move Fogerty could only see as a complete sellout, Cook and Clifford sided with Zaentz in the legal disputes, effectively giving Fogerty's worst enemy the upper hand. This was the point of no return. For Fogerty, this wasn't business. It was a stab in the back. His bandmates had aligned with the very man who was, in his view, stealing his life's work. It confirmed his worst fears, that they were not partners, but adversaries. The formation of Creedence Clearwater Revisited was just the final public insult. From Fogerty's perspective, the damage had been done years earlier, not on a stage, but in a business deal where Stu Cook and Doug Clifford chose a side, leaving him to fight for his music completely alone. There is no betrayal more painful than one from family. The feud at number 3 is perhaps the most tragic and heartbreaking of John Fogerty's life. It's the story of his own brother, CCR's rhythm guitarist, Tom Fogerty. This wasn't just a band breaking up. This was a brotherhood-shattering dot. Tom was John's older brother, the one who initially started the band and was its first lead singer. When John's incredible talent for songwriting became undeniable, Tom stepped back to play rhythm guitar, a move that seemingly planted a seed of resentment that would last a lifetime. While John became the leader, Tom, along with the others, began to feel marginalized. Tom was the first to quit the band in early 1971, fed up with John's creative control and the infighting. But his departure wasn't just about leaving the band. It was about choosing a side. And the side he chose was, for John, the most devastating one possible. Tom Fogerty became close friends with Saul Zaentz, the head of Fantasy Records and the man John considered his personal tormentor. John saw his own brother befriend the man who held the keys to his creative soul, a wound that never healed. In his memoir, John recalls his brother actively working against him. He remembers Tom telling him, in one of their last conversations, that Saul Zaentz was his best friend. John tried to reconcile. He wrote in his book, *Fortunate Son, My Life, My Music*, that he wanted to make peace for the sake of their mother. He suggested they each write down their grievances to work through them. John's list had 8 points. The very first was about a legal dispute where Tom's name appeared on a court filing against him. According to John, Tom denied it ever happened. The attempt at reconciliation collapsed right there. Tragically, they never got another chance. Tom Fogerty passed away in 1990 from complications of AIDS after receiving a tainted blood transfusion. Their relationship was left painfully unresolved. John spoke at his brother's funeral, delivering a heartbreaking eulogy where he said, "We wanted to grow up and be musicians. I guess we achieved half of that. We didn't necessarily grow up." The feud with Tom wasn't about money or fame. It was a deep, personal wound inflicted by the one person who should have been his greatest ally. If the feuds with his bandmates were a civil war, the battle with the man at number 2 was an all-out world war. This adversary wasn't a musician, but he was more destructive to John Fogerty's career than anyone. He was the owner of Fantasy Records and the man who became his arch-nemesis, Saul Zaentz. It all started simply enough. Zaentz was part of a group that bought Fantasy Records in 1967, just as CCR was getting started. He signed the young, hungry band to a deal that, in their naivete, they thought was their big break. In reality, it was a contract that signed away the rights to their music, essentially giving Zaentz ownership of every song John Fogerty wrote for CCR. As the band became a global phenomenon, Fogerty realized the horrible truth. He was, in his own words, a creative sharecropper on his own plantation. He wrote the songs, he sang the songs, but Saul Zaentz owned them. After CCR broke up, the nightmare got worse. To escape his contract, Fogerty had to sign away even more of his rights to the old CCR royalties. He was free, but he was broke, and Zaentz still owned his past. The animosity got very public. In 1985, Fogerty released his comeback album.